unfortunate I have to follow up Chris's awesome speech, but here we are. Like Chris mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about warfare. And really, when you think back to the early stages of mankind, we came to this collective realization that we could take things of value from other people by leveraging violence or the threat of violence over those people. And that was really when we first understood the concept of war. And in the thousands of years that have passed since then, there's not been a single moment in recorded human history where the world has simultaneously been at peace. And the result of that near constant state of conflict is that we've gotten really, really good at war. We understand intimately what it means to launch and successfully execute a warfare campaign. And we've also designed some tools that have evolved where and how we fight wars. Boats, firearms, airplanes, plate armor, the bow and arrow have all changed warfare. And they've all come together to create this idea that we now know as modern warfare, that now Ukraine is getting a lesson in. And the funny part about all of that is that even as we've developed all of these new tools, we've advanced into new domains, the preeminent book on warfare strategy was written 7,000 years ago. Of course, we're talking about Sun Tzu's Art of War that still guides military generals, business leaders, sports coaches, all in strategy on how to win, how to achieve victory. And so as we're advancing into yet another evolution of war, where we're moving into the cyber domain, we see the way Russia is leveraging cyber campaigns in tandem with physical warfare. I thought it'd be worthwhile to revisit the concepts of the strategy of war and how we can apply them to our cyber defense strategy. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Art of War, it was a book that was written in 5 BC that is separated into 13 chapters. And each chapter is dedicated towards an art or a skill that Sun Tzu believed was imperative for generals to understand in order to succeed at war. It was basically a handbook for future generals on how to win a war. But as you're reading through those 13 chapters, there's really 5 strategies that are pretty common throughout the entire book. And so today we're going to be diving into those 5 strategies and how we apply them to our cyber defense strategy. And it starts with a focus on victory. And in historical warfare, victory was a very easily understood and universal concept. You sacked a castle, you killed somebody's king, you took a land, you knew who won the war. It was very binary. There was a winner and a loser. But as we've evolved into modern warfare, the idea of victory has become much more nebulous and relative, and it can be defined by the individuals who are engaged in that war. Which what ends up happening is that a lot of times it doesn't even get defined, at least in a way that everyone understands. Case in point, America's invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. We came there with a very short-term goal of breaking down the Taliban-backed government and removing them and instilling a government that was friendly to American interests. We didn't really have a long-term goal. We knew that we didn't want to be there forever. We knew we didn't want to occupy Afghanistan long-term, and we knew we didn't want to make it part of America, but we didn't really understand what a long-term victory looked like. And what was the result? We were there for 20 years, we spent a couple $1 trillion, a lot of people died, and it was still retaken by the Taliban within 2 weeks after we left. And our security programs can face that same challenge if we fail to define victory. So we need to start there. And that really requires us as security leaders to do three things. We first need to set a vision and a mission statement for our security organization. You probably have one for your larger organization, but you need one specific to your security team. What does victory look like? How are we going to get there? Why are we even doing this? And what are we going to look like when we get there? That provides a goal for your team to work towards, a victory criteria that they can execute against and get behind. It's part of that motivation of motivating your troops towards achieving victory, is by first defining it. It's also going to require you to have a conversation with the highest decision makers in your organization, whether that's a board of directors, a board of trustees, your C-suite, whatever the top looks like. And you have to have a conversation that is honestly not very comfortable, because we need to talk about acceptable levels of risk and acceptable levels of loss, because both of those things are going to happen. It's an inevitable part of doing business in 2022. So we need to understand what we are willing to accept in the form of loss and risk in order to achieve the value that we deliver as an organization. And it really needs a declarative statement from the highest levels of the organization. We deliver XYZ service, and in order to deliver that service, we're willing to take on this amount of loss and this amount of risk to do it. It requires a lot of education to even get them to agree to make a statement like that. So you need to educate the board, educate your senior leaders to get them on board with a statement like that. And then the third part that we need to do is a very similar conversation, but another level down, with our business owners. Usually a director or a VP, but somebody who owns a line of business within the organization. And we're looking for a similar statement, but this time focused on their line of business. We deliver XYZ line of business, and this is what I am willing to take on from a risk and loss perspective within the parameters set by the organization in order to deliver that line of business. Those two things work together to create a definition of victory. If we stay within these risk and loss parameters, if we achieve our vision and our mission statement, we've achieved victory as an organization. Now that we have our definition of victory set, the next thing we need to do is educate across the organization. A lot of security leaders fall into one of two sort of extremes. We either paint everything with these rose-colored glasses that we're secure, everything's fine, don't look behind the curtain, and we give people an overriding sense of calm. You see this a lot in organizations where the security leader has been there for a long time, and they're trying to make sure everybody feels good. And then the other side of that spectrum is the chicken lows. There's risks everywhere, there's threats everywhere, we can't stop them. The business doesn't listen to me, and they generally don't get a whole lot done. And they usually get relegated to a closet where everybody can avoid them. Our job as security leaders is to find the middle ground between those two things. Educate and inform. Make sure everyone knows that there are threats out there. There's always going to be threats out there, and they are serious. And here's what we're doing to address them. Educate, empower. The entire theme around this is be that light in the middle of the cyber storm, and that's really what this is about, is providing that guidance and that context to the rest of the organization from someone who understands it intimately to someone who doesn't. Educate. And then finally, we've defined victory, we've educated across the organization, and now we need to build our team around the idea of excellence so that they can execute to reach victory. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a huge Patriots fan, and one of my favorite things about Bill Belichick is that he brings in a lot of players over the past 20 years, and all of them have the same mindset, that they have a job to do to help the team achieve victory. And their job is to execute their role at the highest possible level. Excellence. Not perfection, that's something totally different, but excellence. And that's how your team achieves victory. In order to instill that in your security team, it requires that culture is created at the very top, starting with us. That we set that expectation, that we demand excellence, we set high standards, and then we allow the team to execute against it. We empower them to reach those high goals. Build your team around the idea of excellence. But how do you know if you've achieved excellence? How do you measure it? That's where your metrics program comes in. Metrics, in my opinion, is the most overlooked important part of a security program that a lot of us ignore. We either don't have a metrics program or it's not a very good one. So I wanted to talk about what we're building at the health system from a metrics perspective to see if it would help you build out your metrics programs. We started by identifying what broad stories we wanted to tell and who we wanted to tell it to. And when we started doing that, we were able to break that down into 3 categories: strategic, operational, and tactical. Your strategy metrics are exactly what they sound like. These are the things you're taking to the board. They are high-level metrics, completely non-technical, focused on the major risks to your organization, any major incidents you may have suffered since the last time you talked to them, how you're executing against the strategy that you've laid out. Very non-technical, very high level to allow them to make broad business decisions. Next level down are your operational metrics, and these are for your risk owners. And it's to provide them with information and context to be able to make appropriate decisions about their risks. Gives them information that they need in order to make the right decision when it comes to implementing new business features, new lines of business. This is also a fantastic place to throw in what I call marketing metrics, which are cool things that your security team has done since the last time you talked to them that will help build excitement around your program and build some goodwill so that it's a lot easier to get future projects done. And then finally, your tactical level metrics. These are the things that you kind of traditionally think of when you think of security metrics. This is to inform you and your leadership about how well your program is performing, how well your tools work, how well are your people performing, how well are you driving the outcomes that you set out to do. This is where you're able to understand, are we achieving excellence? And not only understand it yourself, but then also be able to communicate it across the organization at any level that you need to, depending on the audience that you're trying to reach. The next strategy I want to talk about is a paraphrase of probably the most famous Sun Tzu quote out there. Know yourself and know your enemy. And when it comes to cybersecurity and knowing ourselves, we're really trying to answer 2 questions. What are our assets and what are our capabilities? And when I say understand our assets, you probably roll your eyes a little bit because we've all heard the cliche that we can't protect what we don't know about. And we all know it's true, and we've all heard it 100 times, and we all know that we still struggle with it. Thank you. And that we still struggle with it. So I'm not going to beat on that one for very long. But what I will do is expand on our idea of an asset. When we traditionally think of an asset, we think of something that has a monetary value, a piece of data, a server, a physical location. All of those have a monetary value. And what we often miss is supporting the people, processes, and technologies that support our revenue cycle. Every single organization in here depends on revenue and has a revenue cycle. Whether we get money from traditional customers, from government grants, from people donating it, or from GoFundMe. We all have a revenue cycle, and it's how our organization pays the bills and remains solvent. And the sad fact is, most security leaders and most security personnel do not know their organization's revenue cycle. They can't explain it. They can't tell you where the money comes from, where it flows through the organization, and where it's going. But do you know who does know our revenue cycle? The actors targeting us. They spend about 6 to 12 months on average learning about your organization and specifically learning about your assets and your revenue cycle so that they can surgically strike against that revenue cycle. Because what they figured out over the past couple of years is that if they can stop the money train, we'll pay an exorbitant amount of money to get it moving again. And that's the ransomware problem in a nutshell. So spend time with your finance people, spend time with your marketing people, and really understand your revenue cycle so that you can put appropriate protections throughout that entire cycle. Right here. The next thing you need to understand are your capabilities as a security team. Like Chris so aptly pointed out, your tools are not going to save you. So when I say capabilities, if you immediately think of your technology stack, you probably don't understand your capabilities very well. What I'm talking about is what outcomes can you drive with your collection of people, processes, and technology, which means you need to dig deeper than just the tools in your stack. How well are your people trained? Do they know how to use the tools that you purchased for them? Do they have processes to do something with the output of those tools? Do they know how to act in case of an incident? And then digging into your technology, not only what have you bought, what is completely implemented? How effective is it? When was the last time you validated how effective it was? All of this goes into intimately understanding what outcomes you can achieve as a security team. Now that we understand ourselves, we also have to understand who we're fighting. Because we're not defending against ourselves, we're defending against an adversary. And when you first start down this path of trying to understand your adversary, you will inevitably end up at this long list of all these known threat actors that are out there. It's very long and very extensive, and you'll come across every single TTP in the book when you start to look at this list. And what you'll quickly realize, if you haven't already, is that you cannot possibly protect yourself from every single adversary and every single attack method. You'll go bankrupt doing it, even if you have a bottomless budget. So we know we need to narrow this list down to better understand who is likely to attack us. And this is where real threat intelligence comes in handy. Understanding which adversaries might be targeting your organization, whether it's because of the vertical you operate in, what region you operate out of, or just the color on your logo. Whatever reason they have for targeting your organization makes them a relevant threat actor in your threat community. Once you've narrowed that list down, then we need to understand their capabilities. What tools do they have? What tactics are they using? Where are they targeting organizations where we should be putting defenses up? And then you focus on the intersection between your capabilities and their capabilities. There's some really great tools that will help you do this. The most common of them is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm a huge fan of it. If you're not familiar with it, basically it's a matrix. I believe there's 245 currently, techniques that threat actors use to attack your organization and then exfiltrate pieces of value from it. And the reason why it's so powerful is because you can map your capabilities to detect or protect against each of those 245 techniques. You can then map your adversary's capabilities against the exact same matrix. And it gives you immediate visibility into where you have gaps in your coverage. If we know that a threat actor is using cloud-based data exfiltration, and we have no way of detecting it, we know we've got a gap there that we need to focus on, whether that's a process investment, a people investment, or a technology investment. We know we need to cover that gap. It's also a fantastic strategic metric. If today I took my organization and mapped it against the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and I've identified, let's say, 180 relevant techniques to my organization, but I can only detect 90 of them, that's a problem. So I start investing in it, and I get a year down the road, and now I can cover 170 of them. I'm almost there. I now have a quantifiable metric I can take to my board that is completely non-technical. I can say there are 180 different ways that attackers are using to target our organization. We used to only cover 50% of them, and now I can cover 90% of them. It's completely non-technical, it's completely approachable, and it gives them a solid understanding of how you've grown as an organization. For any of us who have ever had to try to present that information before, you understand how powerful of a tool that can be. Next, let's talk about allies. Not every single, but the majority of the threat actors out there have some sort of alliance. Whether it's the really powerful ones that are backed by nation states like Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, etc., or whether it's communities of threat actors who pass off organizations in phases of the kill chain based on what their specialty is. They have alliance groups that they're using to work against us. So they have allies, and we have our allies too. When you think of allies, your mind immediately goes to our vendors, some of who are with us today, because they are the ones helping us to fight this war against our adversaries. But who are our allies, really? How much do we understand about them? What outcomes are they able to drive for us? How invested are they in our success? The term partner gets thrown around a lot in the vendor space, and I always get a chuckle out of it because the majority of vendors honestly fall short of what I would consider to be a partner. I use Microsoft as kind of my punching bag of like the anti-partner because they don't care. They don't care about you, they don't care about your organization, they don't care whether you get breached. The only thing they care about is whether your check clears at the next renewal. But they do a good job at making you feel otherwise during those sales calls, don't they? So make sure you're digging into your allies, make sure you understand what they're actually doing and what they're supposed to be doing. We'll take Gitpol, for example. At their core, they are a configuration management and enforcement software. But the outcomes they drive, compliance, attack surface reduction, those are outcomes that we know we can get with one of our allies. So understand deeper than just what's on the label. Understand what outcomes you can drive with your allies and where they're going to get you to a better place than you were today before you sign that purchase order. And allies are not just technology. There's a lot of great providers that are able to give you strategic advice, help you out, and help you build plans to address some of those gaps in your organization. Think of allies more broadly. Think of them as partners. And when you demand that your vendors be partners and be allies in your fight, you'll start finding you automatically start raising the bar of what you expect out of them. Finally, I want to talk about vendor selection, which is a bit of a touchy topic because the cybersecurity landscape has become incredibly commoditized over the past 10 years. There is VC money pouring in, faster than anybody can burn it. And so what that means is that we as the customer have a lot of competition for our budget dollars. So there's free Xboxes, free AirPods, free Yeti coolers, all trying to get you to part with your budget dollars. And what that usually ends up landing is that we end up with bad partners because they weren't selected. They won the bidding war to get your business, whether it was through the best price or by bribing the right person. They won the battle for that budget dollar. I come from the government space, so I'm a sucker for a good RFP process. Nothing nearly as painful as what the government puts everybody through. But the core of the idea that you have a structured selection process is something I'm a huge fan of. And so for my team, number one, I don't select our technology partners, which I know is strange. Most security leaders are the ones making the technology decisions. What we do is we decide what outcomes we're trying to drive and what requirements we have in order for a vendor to be able to meet those outcomes. And then we go through a selection process. And we allow vendors to participate. And the process is democratic. Every single person on the selection team has an equally weighted voice, including mine. I hold veto power over any vendor that I don't feel like is a partner. I can kill that, but I'm not selecting who is representing our organization. We account for all those perspectives, from the very most technical engineer to myself, who analyzes more of the business and financial side, and all of them are weighted equally against each other. I'm not gonna try to convince you guys to use an RFP process, but what I will say is structure your selection process. And make sure you're using it consistently and forcing your team to use it consistently. It makes it much more likely that you're going to end up with an ally instead of just a line item on your budget report. Next, let's talk about coordination. One of the fascinating things about America's response in World War II is that we had, at that time, the most dominant civilian economy the world had ever seen. Our GDP was climbing aggressively. We were manufacturing things for the entire world. And then the attack on Pearl Harbor happened, and almost overnight, we turned all of that civilian production capability into the greatest war machine the world has ever seen. And that required coordination across the entire nation at all different levels. Every single American's lives were impacted by that change, whether it was something as simple as women couldn't buy pantyhose anymore, or you couldn't get the food you wanted anymore on store shelves. Everyone's lives changed at least a little bit in order to support the war. And the result was we won convincingly, repeatedly, every single battle until the end of World War II. And we need to build that type of coordination within our own organizations. As Chris pointed out, your organization is at war. Your C-suite are your generals. They are the leaders of your war effort. And in order to get them on board with that, you need to first become a part of the organization you're trying to defend. We as security practitioners have often and historically liked to consider ourselves mages wielding the dark security arts in the basement of the organization. That's not good enough anymore, because cybersecurity is not an IT problem, it's a business problem now. And if we don't treat it as a business problem and as a part of the organization, we're never going to build that level of support and organization that we need in order to deliver an effective response. We need to reframe ourselves as business advisors, risk consultants, business units, another piece of the organization that is invested in the success of the organization. I joined the health system in July of last year, and on my very first day, our CEO said, we do not compete with other health systems in the Midwest because we are trying to be the best. So we compete against the top 10% of health systems across the nation on one metric: patient care. And he's reiterated that message probably 100 times in the past 6 months that I've been there. And as a security leader, that was the most powerful thing he could have possibly said, because it gave me clarity. So I no longer have security objectives. I no longer have security risks. I have patient care risks. Ransomware is not a IT risk. It's an availability to patient care systems risk. Loss of patient data is not a security risk. It's a patient confidentiality risk. When you're able to reframe your security objectives as empowering or enabling business objectives, you're not going to have to fight that same uphill battle we've been fighting for the past 30 years. Now, your CEO is already championing your message because he's pushing the business goals and you're empowering the business goals. It's a small change of frame for security, but it's a huge change in the way it comes across to the rest of the organization. And by that change, you're going to be able to generate support. And again, not have to continue that uphill climb that we know doesn't work. Focus on becoming a part of the organization and supporting and empowering the organization. And we'll be able to get a lot more traction in our security goals than what we've seen historically. And don't forget about our outside partners as well. There are really two primary groups that I strongly recommend coordinating with outside of your organization. The first of those are your government partners at the state and federal level. A lot of states now have cybersecurity task forces that bring a lot of additional resources and expertise that you're able to leverage for free, especially if you're in a critical infrastructure organization. And at the same time, the federal level has very similar programs backed by the FBI, DHS, CISA, that will even, in many cases, provide free services, like they do free vulnerability scanning, free web application scanning. You can leverage those partners in order to strengthen your program and find more allies that you can coordinate with. The other type of coordination I recommend is exactly what we're doing here. Coordinate with your industry peers. We as an industry historically are not very good at sharing information. We are naturally safe and very skeptical of other people. We don't like to talk about our dirty laundry, the breaches we've had, the vulnerabilities we can't get patched, the end-of-life systems that we can't figure out how to secure, the new tactics that an adversary used that got through our high-priced AI ML system. But by sharing that information across the industry, we're able to leverage the collective knowledge of all of us against all of them. Because our threat actors are sharing information openly, very openly. There's entire dark web forums dedicated to just information sharing. They sell credentials to each other. They sell persistent access to each other. We need to be able to coordinate at the same level that they are so that we're able to, once one organization or an industry sees something new, everyone else is ready for it. We don't see multiple organizations getting pwned by the exact same techniques until everyone finally catches up. Become a part of the organization. It'll help you build that support across your organization and then coordinate outside of your organization. The last strategy I want to talk about is avoiding losing. And if you laugh when I say that, it's perfectly fine because it sounds so easy. Like, no, duh, just don't lose. If it were that easy, we'd all sleep a lot better at night. But when Sun Tzu talks about avoiding losing, what he's really talking about is avoid the easy mistakes that your opponent just has to show up to win. When it comes to sports, there's an old adage that the team that makes the fewest mistakes usually wins. And it's often true. Usually turnovers, penalties, fouls, all contribute towards your team losing. And in our industry, those mistakes are unpatched systems, end-of-life systems, things that we know are there, and it's not sexy enough to go take care of it. It's not worth the eye rolls of our infrastructure teams. We need to focus on those. Those are the things that any script kiddie can build an automated script to attack your organization because they're easy. Focus on those. It's not fun. It's not going to be cool. It's not going to make an awesome bullet point on any of our resumes, but it is going to protect you because it's closing the front gate of your base. It's making sure that they have to at least try in order to get into your organization. Whenever I talk about cyber defense, I always feel bad if I don't end on the fact that you are going to be attacked. We all know this. You're going to suffer a breach. You're going to suffer data loss. This is why we need to set acceptable amounts of loss, because it's going to happen. Statistically, it's likely to happen within the next 12 months to everyone in this room. And so you have to understand that and be prepared for it, because each of those attacks are a battle, and we're fighting a war. So just because you lose a battle doesn't mean you need to lose the war. This is where you need incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity, so that you can take those wounds in each of those battles and get back up and keep fighting as an organization, because they're going to keep coming. They're going to constantly keep coming, because that's the resolve of our threat actors. Some of you may know we just recently became Vigilant customers, like 6 weeks ago, something like that. And one of the reasons why we selected Vigilant was because they understand this. They understand that they are the backstop of everything else. We talk a lot about moving left of bang, and that's fantastic. That's absolutely the goal. But you're not always going to get there. And you may be there for 90% of use cases, but that 10% is where you get hit. And so you have to be able to respond, contain, and recover quickly when that bomb goes off on that right-hand side. So have partners invest in your own capabilities so that you can contain those, you can recover from them, and they're not a mortal wound to your organization that's going to take you out of the fight. That's how you fight a battle, and that's how you win a war. Thank you very much for spending time with me this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.